can we learn from the transformation of the Rust Belt industry? This is the Leaders of Transformation podcast. And on this show, we interview difference makers and world changers who are disrupting for good. I'm your host, Nicole Jansen, and our guest today is Stephen Blue. Stephen is the president and CEO of Miller Ingenuity, which is a global supplier of high technology systems that protect assets, preserve the environment, and save lives. He has extensive experience in transforming cultures and bridging the gap between the Rust Belt traditions of business and high tech. And he is the author of 5 books and has addressed audiences at Harvard Business School, the United Nations, Industry Week, CEO Clubs International, and so many more. And today we're going to talk about how he transforms Rust Belt companies into high-tech cultures with a track record of tripling returns on any business he touches. And so we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about where organizations get stuck, and how to create a Cirque du Soleil culture and ignite your innovational potential. So I'm really excited for this conversation. Steve, welcome to the Leaders Transformation.
Well, thank you, Nicole. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. And before we do dive in, I want to do a quick shout out to Smith Publicity. They have sent me some amazing guests on the show. They introduced me to you, Stephen. And so we just want to do a shout out for them and say thank you. I always appreciate those that are supporting this show. And that's what makes the show a success. Of course, also our listeners and our viewers as well. We're glad that you're here, and we know that it's going to be very valuable to you as a business leader and somebody that wants to transform your community. So let's dive in and talk about this Rust Belt industry, Steve. First of all, why did you pick that industry, or how did you fall into it?
Well, I sort of didn't pick it, Nicole. I did, like most people, I sort of fell into it. One day I was working for a high technology company called Allen Bradley, which is now owned by Rockwell International. And Allen Bradley was one of the pioneers of the programmable controllers and numerical controls. And so I was in a high-tech industry, and one day I got a call from a headhunter that asked me if I wanted to join a turnaround in a little industry called the railroad industry in a little town called Rochester, New York. And I thought, no, I don't think so. I'm doing pretty good here at Allen Bradley. I was in middle management at the time, but I couldn't turn away from the challenge of a turnaround. I have to say, though, Nicole, and many of your listeners probably know this, I didn't really know what that meant. I didn't know what it would involve. And one of the most important lessons I ever learned in business was being in a turnaround. Because in a turnaround, it's like real money. It's not like, on Wall Street, when you got all kinds of, assets behind you and you can go to the markets and borrow money if you need to. I mean, if you run out of cash in a turnaround, you're dead. And I remember many times, Nicole, we would have to make choices between making the payroll or paying the utility bill. And it would come down to like the last day, PG&E would call us and say, if you don't give us a payment now, we're going to turn off all your power. And so I really learned what business really means up front and personal. And that was sort of, I wouldn't say that was exactly Rust Belt, but it was partially Rust Belt. Many of the products in that company were electronic, but they were like 20 years old. So they were way, way, way past their prime. And we had a variety of products from Rust Belt kind of metal and plastic compounding until, more complex electronic products. And so I just sort of fell into that industry. And I ended up I'm still in the rail industry. I ended up loving the rail industry just because it's small enough you can wrap your mind around it. I mean, if you're like in industrial automation, where I came from before that, you can't wrap your mind around that. If you're in financial services, it's so huge, you can't really wrap your mind around that. And the rail industry was an industry I could wrap my mind around, and I ended up having a lot of good friends over the years there. And I sort of, got a call from a headhunter one day and I took the job.
Well, when you mentioned about turnarounds, I think, and the high stakes of it, I think about some of our entrepreneurs who are listening who can appreciate that because it is real money and it is their money.
Yep.
And, sometimes it's those tough decisions that we've got to make in terms of how to move forward. And until you get to that point where you have that abundance that you can work with and play with. But coming back to this idea of transforming the businesses from the Rust Belt industry,
Mhm.
maybe talk about some of the qualities of a Rust Belt company, and then you've been very instrumental in transforming them to high technology companies. How do you do that? Like, I just think about not just logistical, but like even from a mindset standpoint,
Yeah,
cultural
that's good.
standpoint.
That's a good point. Cultural, you look at a Rust Belt company and you look at the factors and the complexities of it. It's not very complex. It's like you got a metal product or you got a plastic product, and you usually have as much lead time as you want to deliver it. Your costs are sort of known, and it's not rocket science in a Rust Belt company. The problem with that, of course, is the margins are just awful. I mean, they're just really awful, and everybody and his brother is competing against you. And then when you look at offshore, particularly the Chinese, it's almost impossible in a Rust Belt company to compete against the Chinese, because Rust Belt companies generally have high labor content, right? And the Chinese may have high labor content, but they don't pay high labor wages, right? And so it's just a mess. I don't know why anybody would want to stay in the Rust Belt segment if they didn't have to. Now, the reason most people stay there is because they don't know how to get out of it. And if you look at the features of a Rust Belt company, the culture is a really good point, Nicole, because the culture is, we don't have to really innovate much here. We just keep doing what we're doing, and it'll be fine. And we don't really have to worry about anything. Just keep churning out the product. You start talking about high technology, the culture has to be like that, lightning fast, lightning fast. You've got to always be able to turn on a dime. You have to take a lot. Rust Belt companies don't take any risks, so the culture is risk adverse. And high technology companies, they have to take risks because you're dealing in the unknown. You don't really, okay, so you do your diligence, you do, all kinds of product development, you do all kinds of market research, you test your assumptions and all that, but still at the end of the day, you don't know what's going to happen when you enter that field or you enter that product. I'll give you a perfect example. I have a product now that's called Zone Guard. It's basically a very high technology product that protects rail workers from getting killed by trains in its most simplest form. Well, nobody had ever done it before. We did it. And one of the biggest problems was market adoption, because, okay, if you do a Me Too product, the market goes, yeah, I got that. I understand that. Fine. Give me the best price or the best delivery and I'll buy it from it. You do something that's never been done before. Well, think about the iPhone when it first came out, right? It's like, who needs that? Why do I need all that stuff? I don't need email. I don't need, the internet. And when you introduce a brand new product into the world, perhaps your biggest problem, Nicole, is to get the market to understand how it can be used and believe that they do need it to be used, and then get them to use it. And that's really tough.
Well, and I think about the customer, but then also, when you're talking about even like vendors and so forth, to start to see those Rust Belt companies as something different than what they are. I think everybody puts them in a box,
Yep.
and the workers themselves put themselves in a box and say,
Yep.
this is all that I'm capable of. This
Yep.
is all I've known. My father did it. My uncle did. Everybody's, been in that industry perhaps. And it's like, this is what we do. I mean, you see
Mm-hmm.
that, a lot where people are like, well, this is just all I've known and this is all that I do. How do you take, when you're taking a company, obviously it's not just the product, it's also the people. And you talk about that in your book that I read, Metamorphosis. So a plug for that book. Very like hardcore, straight shooter, approach to it, which is like, this is what it takes and
Mm-hmm.
to transform a company. And part of the reality of that is that you have to work with people that may have a certain set of skills in a certain box that they put themselves in. And now high tech, that takes a whole different set of skills.
Yep.
So, what's the shift? How do you make that shift, even in helping people to kind of expand their vision as to what they're capable of?
Well, I'll start with the market. My company, actually, our corporation name is Miller Felpax. Don't ask me what that means. I could explain it, but you wouldn't want it'd bore you, right? But that was the name of our company, and that's perfectly suited the company in terms of low technology. Everybody understood us. And then when we decided that we needed to become a high tech company, we couldn't continue on as Miller Felpax. We had to change our publicly facing trade name to what is now called Miller Ingenuity. And we had to convince the market first that we were actually a high technology company. Now, it takes a lot more than just changing your name, but you have to start with that. And so you have to condition the marketplace in a variety of ways to believe that, oh yeah, these guys really are high tech. And so you don't leave old clothes on when you're trying to become a high technology company. And then if you take a look at the inside, I still have a group of employees that still do the same thing they always did. Low technology, because you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I need the low technology products to fund the new technology. And so those products are very important to us. Their margins aren't all that good. And so we have sort of two types of employees in the company, the lower technology ones and the higher technology ones. But here's the key, Nicole. You know how when you were in high school, there were cool kids in high school?
Yeah.
And there were not cool kids? Well, I don't know about you, but I was not a cool kid in high school, right? And how did that make you feel, right?
Yeah.
And so I went to great lengths to make sure every time I hold an employee meeting, I'd be sure that while we're talking about the new stuff that's going on, how that's working out real well, I continue to talk about. And by the way, the older stuff here is just as important, if not more important. So I was very careful not to have a class of cool kids and the not cool kids. And along the way, we gave everybody we told everybody, now we're going to make this transition. It's going to take a decade, easy. And while we're doing it, nobody's going to get laid off. And you have to, it's one thing to make that promise. It's another thing when you get in a downturn, which we did during the pandemic, to keep that promise. And so I promised everyone, I said, no one's going to lose their job as a result of us moving into the high tech. We will train you. We will transition you. We will give you all the tools and all the skills and everything you need to make the transition so you can come along with the company as it's moving along. Otherwise, people would say, okay, well, I see what's going to happen now. They're going to move into this new thing and then I'll be out of a job. Those things don't happen for decades sometimes, but employees will go, ooh, if you don't tell them, they'll automatically assume the worst, right? And so one of the things I still do, I do it constantly, is I communicate. And I tell CEOs all the time, you have to be bone honest with people. Tell them the truth. Tell them what's going on. Tell them what could happen. They're not babies. Don't treat them like babies. When you treat employees like babies, they'll start acting like babies. And that was a big part of our transition, was constantly communicating with people. Why are we doing all this? And what happens, which is just as important, what happens if we don't do this? Now, it's one thing to say, you talk to your board and you go, I need a couple of $1 million to make this transition, or whatever it is, 10 million. And here's all the gold at the end of the rainbow we're going to get once that's done. That isn't going to motivate anybody. But if you paint the other side of the picture, is here's what's going to happen to us if we don't do it. And you do that with facts and you do that with figures. You don't do it with conjecture. Here's what happens if we don't do it. You have to paint both sides of the picture for your board and your employees.
Yeah. Yeah. So they know why.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is most people don't like change.
No.
And I mean, there's some of us, we say, oh, we love change. But the truth is we like change that we planned and that we're in control of.
Yep.
And that we expect, right? Like there's no surprises to it.
Right.
So, yeah.
No, you're right. I don't like change.
No, I mean, yeah. So talk about this Cirque du Soleil culture and how this applies to what you're talking about right now.
I love that. I assume you've seen a Cirque du Soleil performance.
I haven't actually, although I am from Canada, And for
That's
surprisingly,
where
I
they're
just
from.
haven't. I haven't.
Yeah.
I haven't seen one yet.
It's
Gotta
pretty
be on the list.
spectacular. And what I tell people all the time is, what the culture you want in your company is a Cirque du Soleil like culture. And then I get a glassy look. What does that mean? Well, okay, I'll tell you what it means. If you've ever been to one of these performances, every one of those performers comes to work every single day with one purpose in mind: to do better than they did yesterday. Not to do good, not to do all right, not to meet the standard, to do better than they did yesterday. And I told people, you don't see when, like they're swinging around and all that, you don't see the one guy go, "Hup, I'm not catching you today. I don't feel like it. I'm mad at you for something you said to me or did to me yesterday." And so then CEOs tell me, "Oh, come on, stop it. This isn't a circus. This is a company. It's a business." Why wouldn't you want everybody that's that jazzed up in your company? So how do you do it? You treat them that way. Obviously, you compensate them that way. You communicate with them that way. You give them the skills, and you treat them like Cirque du Soleil performers. And guess what? If a Cirque du Soleil performer, you don't tell that performer, if you're whoever the director is, you don't say, "You know what? I don't think, I'm not going to give you another sick day this year. I don't like the way, you have to treat them like gold. You have to treat them like they're irreplaceable. You have to treat them like they're the best thing that you could ever have. And if you treat your employees that way, guess what? They will react like you wouldn't believe. I'll give you a quick example. In my company, everybody gets compensated on one number. That's called profit. Everybody. Okay. Now, people have, departments have sub goals because you have to, but it's not like in big companies where the human resource department will say, every employee's got to have 3 goals. So give me 3 goals. Well, they'll come up with 3 goals that they might be meaningless. They won't contribute to the bottom line necessarily, but they'll do it. In my company, we have one number. It's called profit. And I get my bonus if we hit the number, and so does everybody else, and everybody knows what it is. And I don't get mine if we don't hit the number, and neither does anybody else. So it's very, very clear. I love compensation programs that are very clear and are articulated very well. One time, a number of years ago, we're on a calendar year. I'm walking through the factory. It's like the first week in December, and one of the factory employees comes up to me and says, "Steve," because everybody knows we show them the number every month, so there's nobody wonders where we are. He said, "I'm really worried about making the number this year." And I said, "Yeah, so am I." I just told him the truth. And he said, "What can I do to help us achieve the operating profit number for the year?" And I love that. Think of the power of that, Nicole, where a factory employee is worried about whether the company's going to make the profit number and how he can help you get there. That's the power of treating people like Cirque du Soleil performers and having one number that everybody chases.
Yeah. That actually brings up an interesting point, because I know that you're also very interested in preserving the environment and so forth. And I know that nowadays there's this triple bottom line focus. And how does that play into it? Because you've had tons of experience in business.
Well, there isn't a reason you can't do both.
Mm-hmm.
If you have the intention of doing both. I'll give you an example. We have a product. I won't bore you with what it's called, but it basically saves the railroads and operating costs by using less oil. Okay.
Okay.
When we first introduced the product, the railroads were dumping gallons and gallons and millions of gallons of oil on the roadbed every year. And not because they wanted to, but because they didn't have any options. They didn't know what to do about it. We introduced a product that took a long time to get into commercialization that changed that from millions of gallons a year to what can be measured by the teaspoonful. Now, when we run our simulation tests on where it would be in the railroad, we measure it in teaspoons. And that is such a perfect win-win, because it preserves the environment and it reduces railroad operating costs by a ton, and it puts a lot of money in my company's pocket too. So if you approach it from, it's not an either or situation. You can't either preserve the environment or make money. If you preserve it, well, I'm going to do both. There's no reason why you can't.
Yes. And I also hear when you're emphasizing the support of the people, and building up the people, it's also that third aspect, which is the people. So it's the profit, it's the planet, it's also the people as
Yep.
well. So that's great. So why do some companies, when it comes to, so they know they need to innovate, bottom line, I mean, maybe not at the factory level, but certainly at the leadership level, they can look around and, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that, things are changing around them.
Yeah.
Why do some, even though they have the potential to innovate, why don't they?
Well, it's hard.
What holds them back?
It's really hard. Okay. What typically happens, Nicole, is the CEO will say, I want innovation. Boom, now go do it. And then he's disengaged. So the CEO has to be personally and directly involved in the innovation process. You have to set goals for it. You have to have consequences for if you don't do it. I'll give you an example. When you noted not necessarily the factory, innovation in my company comes from every place, including the factory. And I'll tell you why and how. Years ago, when we decided we needed to be more innovative, we hired a guy that used to be the chief creativity officer for the QVC network. Let me say that once again, chief creativity officer for the QVC network, and now he's a consultant. I brought him in to teach every single employee the principles of innovation. Now, when I tell people that, they go, what? A home shopping network? You're trying to transpose that into a factory? Well, the innovation principles are the same. And QVC is a very innovative company. When he started there, they were like, I don't know, 80 million, something like that. When he left, they were in the billions. That wasn't all due to him, but it was, primarily him. And so I brought him in. I had him teach every single employee in the company the principles of innovation, starting from the ground up, starting from brainstorming. How do you brainstorm? How do you build upon that? And then he'd come in and he'd ride shotgun. He'd give them all assignments, and he'd come in and ride shotgun. And a couple of weeks later, he'd see how they did and all that. Then after a while, they were able to do this all on their own, and they wanted to do it on their own because it's amazing, Nicole. If you let employees use their brains, especially factory people, they go, wow, I have a brain, and they recognize it. They started really getting into this. And one day somebody came up to me in the factory and he said, you know what? I love this innovation stuff. They were doing it out in the factory. They were doing whatever they could. And we could do it better if we had a dedicated space only to innovation, like a think tank. And I said, let me make sure I got this right. So you want me to take a place in my factory that now makes money, churns out widgets, and you want me to turn that into a think tank? And about now he's thinking, I shouldn't have opened my mouth. And I told him, I said, I love it. I spent $500,000 on a space. The employees named it the Creation Station. It's a high-tech space, and people can go back there anytime they want. And talk about any problem they want or any idea they have. No one tells them what to do. They don't have to ask permission to be in there. And it's amazing the magic that comes out of that. I've been asked many times, mostly by my board, where's the beef? And that $500,000. I said, look, a CEO won't bat an eyelash at spending $500,000 on a CNC machine. I do it all the time, right? Why? Because it's an income generating asset. I get that. My Creation Station is also an income generating asset. And I can give you 2 or 3 major developments that came directly out of that space. And I can't even tell you the millions that come out because we have innovation in the factory and processes. We have innovation in the development area. And where I put that space, Nicole, was right in the middle of the factory. I didn't put it in the office because I wanted to make a statement. This is not an office thing. It's not a white collar thing. It's kind of an everybody thing.
I love that. It reminds me of somebody I had on the show a few years back, Jeremy Scrivens, and he talks about appreciation inquiry in this process and bringing the entire company together and walking them through this process. And actually, rather than having like the C-suite all in their own table, and conversation, is to actually disperse and mix up everybody. And it was incredible, the ideas. And I think if you give people the permission, like you said,
Absolutely,
to actually think and use their brains, and they're the ones in the front line. So they actually know what are the things that are actually not working, that haven't worked for years, and so forth. beyond even the bigger vision of what's happening out there in the world, in the marketplace, and so forth. So
you give them the permission, you give them the tools, the techniques to do that. It's amazing what they will unlock. They've been waiting to unlock it. And by the way, we used to have, when we started this adventure, we had some people that they didn't want any part of that. No, I want to come in, punch the time clock. We don't have time clocks, by the way. I smashed them all once with a sledgehammer years ago and got rid of them. I only want to come in, do my thing, and leave. You know what we say to them? We'd like you to go to work for another company, because that's not what we want here. And you get what you tolerate in an employee, or what you accept in an employee. And our employees, by the way, even in the factory, evaluate each other. Performance evaluations are done by the group, right? Now the legal guys will say, oh boy, you're gonna get in trouble with that. Human resources will say, no, if it's not a supervisor, okay, I don't want to hear any of that. So therefore, people know they're being evaluated by their peers, and they know that it's not just some supervisor who may or may not really know what they do on a day-to-day basis, but their peers do.
Talk about that, because that's very interesting, actually, because the other thing with managers is sometimes they have their egos and they, all of that when it comes to performance reviews. But when you have a group that's doing it, it's a very different dynamic. So how does that work?
It is. And our employees, it's pretty amazing. Every single employee in my factory is trained in every single job. So today, as an example, in this one area, if we don't have orders for that, we don't have people sitting around sort of maybe building inventory or whatever. They swarm over to the area where we do have the orders, and they make that decision all by themselves. We call them, I think we'll call them toolbox meetings. First thing in the morning, they all get together. What do we got in orders today? Oh, got to go over here, got to do this, got to do that. Nobody's telling them what to do. They're all doing it on their own, because we've empowered them to, and we've trained them and to have the ability to do that. And that's the power of turning people loose. But to your point, your old line managers will go, my mother asked me this one time, she goes, I was over seeing her, God rest her soul, when she's still alive. She goes, how do you know people are working there? You're not there. Well, they work when you're not watching them. That's old mentality. That's it. That's still in a lot of supervisors today, that they think, because that's how they justify their, to your point, egos. That's how they justify their hay evaluation for compensation. And I got to make sure I'm telling them what to do. Otherwise, why do they need me? I don't have any supervisors in my factory. I got one factory manager who sort of like oversees everything. He orders inventory and raw materials and all that kind of stuff, because that's beyond employees' ability and scope. Other than that, people just do whatever they have to do. I don't even know how they do it. One time I was came into the factory on a Saturday, came to my office, do some catch-up work, and I look over at one of the loading docks, and there's a U-Haul truck there. That's odd. We use commercial carriers. What's a U-Haul truck? So I had to go find out what it was, Nicole. So I walked around, and there's a half a dozen employees there, and they're unloading this U-Haul truck. That's weird. There was a couple of factory people there, a shipping person there, an engineer there. I said, what's going on, guys? Well, we have this particular product that we couldn't get the material in time to meet a customer demand. So we called all over the United States until we could find the materials, electronic materials that we need. Then we rented a U-Haul, and we went and got the stuff and brought it back.
Wow.
I mean, how terrific is that?
Yeah, that is awesome.
Because people ask me all the time, how do your people do what they do? I don't know. I really don't know.
You created the environment for them.
That's exactly
to be
right.
able to do it. And there's a principle here where you were talking about earlier, and I forget, I think it was Benjamin Zander, who was like the orchestra leader of I think it was the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra. And so he's a conductor. And he said, people will operate at the level of your expectation and your belief for them. And we've seen that in different ways. And also what you're also talking about is acknowledge the behavior you want more of. So, you want to encourage that. And then people go, oh, actually, you know what, I kind of like this. I like actually coming and being involved in something. People
Yep.
want to be part of a winning team. I mean, if
Mhm.
they didn't, then sports wouldn't be the
Wouldn't
success that
exist.
they are right now.
Yep.
People are like, we won. You didn't do anything. You're sitting on the sidelines. But
Right.
here is an opportunity where they get to say, we won, we succeeded together, and then everybody wins. I love that. So, what are some of the biggest challenges? If, there's people out there maybe listening that, and I always love to learn from my guests and people that have extensive experience like yourself, some of the biggest challenges that you face that maybe you weren't expecting, blindsided,
Mhm.
and how you were able to navigate through that. Like you said, we don't like change. And so even sometimes, as much as you might have all that experience, there's still things that you learn and discover along the way.
I've been around a long time. I've been in senior leadership for over 40 years. So there's not much I haven't seen, and I tell people when I do interviews like this, I'm not that smart. I've just been around long enough that I've seen everything, right? But even that, I get blindsided all the time. A couple of times a year, I'll get blindsided. I just wrote a piece for Industry Week, and I said, you know what? Whenever you think everything is going well, you got a problem. You just haven't seen
Mhm.
it yet. You haven't recognized it yet. And every time I sat back and went, yeah, I got this CEO thing down. I'm a smart guy. I could just relax. Something bad happened. And so now when I start feeling like that, which is often, I start digging into the organization. I start asking questions. What's going on here? What's going on there? What's going on there? Tell me about this. Tell me about that. A lot of curiosity until I uncover what's about the blind side. The big blindsider was the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
And I wrote a piece for, I think it was Fast Company, where I said, the next pandemic is coming. Are you ready for it? Okay, maybe it won't be a medical pandemic or a health pandemic, but maybe it could be a competitor enters your field that you didn't expect, didn't know about. The government puts a regulation on you that you didn't know about. They want to outlaw your product. Who knows? But the only way that you can be sure that you can be ready for the next pandemic is called a strong balance sheet. Now, the companies that didn't survive the pandemic, I don't know all of them, but I can tell you, I bet I'm right. They all had weak balance sheets, too much
Yeah.
debt, not enough cash flow, whatever. And we went through the pandemic with a strong balance sheet, and actually our balance sheet ended up even stronger the year after that because we went into it. So I tell CEOs all the time, you need to always be strengthening your balance sheet because weak balance sheets tend to get weaker over time. Oh, well, borrow a little bit more money, we'll renew the revolver, all kinds of things that people do that they ought not to do. And I understand it's sort of tempting to say, let's borrow a little more money that we could do this. Don't borrow any money that you don't have to borrow, because when your top line goes south, that's when the trouble starts. And most companies have margins, I don't know, 15%, maybe if they're lucky. You don't have much maneuvering room, Nicole, when
Yeah.
your top line starts. So I tell CEOs all the time, always work on strengthening your balance sheet. Then in a sense, there are things you can never predict and you can never plan for and you can never account. So don't stress all night. Look at all the things that might happen. I'm watching competitor A. He might, make this move, fine. But the competitor that's not even in your market that suddenly decides to get in it, you don't even know who they are. So there's no way that you can predict and plan for everything, but you can make sure you have a strong balance sheet.
Yeah, that's wisdom right there. I mean, I think about when you talk about high tech, and a lot of times, there's this idea that, yeah, we'll just borrow and leverage, and then,
Yeah.
yeah, um, that doesn't go well. It doesn't go well in real estate. We see that with people. It's interesting, even small entrepreneurs who, I think they can, it's because I coach entrepreneurs, and I'll see a lot of them. They'll say like, I need to borrow this money to go do X, Y, and Z, right? I need to borrow this money to go grow my business. But
Yeah.
coming back to this idea of innovation, and that's at all levels of size business, is before you go borrowing the money, think about how you can actually do it in a different way where you don't have to pay the money back. You don't have to
Yeah.
incur debt for that. I have one of
Yep.
one of my mentors used to say that the very best way to create capital to working capital to use is to sell something. right? Is to actually go out there and generate value in the marketplace
Yep.
and do that. And you don't have to pay it back. So, and you, of course, it strengthens your business and all of that, that's
I'll give you a
really,
perfect. I'll give you a perfect example. My latest high tech product, I could have spent an enormous amount of money right up front on that. I could have said, you know what, we got to do 15, 20 million, and no. I said to my board, I said, what we're going to do is we're going to spend a little bit, see how it goes. Spend a little bit more, see how it goes. If we're happy in how it went, we'll spend a little bit more. If we're not happy in how it went, we won't spend a little bit more. So the tendency is just, spend a lot of money and kind of hope for the best. I like to earn it as we go.
yeah. Yeah. I hear kind of like that tradition, and then the new way of doing things, which is very, like, as I said, can be very inflated in terms of expectations.
Yeah,
There's this balance that I'm hearing and that's wisdom, right? It's this balance
it's the
between,
balance.
yeah, between the two. That is awesome.
Yeah.
So what is it that perhaps we haven't talked about today that it would be important for companies that are looking to transform themselves today,
Mhm.
what they need to look? Is there anything that we haven't talked about that we need
The
to
only
talk
only
about?
thing I'd mention, we've talked about almost all of it, is it's a long process.
Mm,
Transformation is a long, arduous process, and you have several constituents. You got your board or your shareholders, you got your employees, you got your customers, and you have to sort of manage the expectations all the way around. And so when I went into my first high tech product, I told the board, I said, don't expect anything out of this for the next 3 or 4 years, and so let's not talk about it. Otherwise, I'd have gotten a lot of pressure after the first year. Where's the beef? Where's the beef? Then I'd feel compelled to spend more money and provide more resources. And you have to realize, I tell CEOs all the time, if you're going to transform from Rust Belt it's a 10-year process. And if you're not up for that, fine. I'm not saying you're wrong, but if you're not up for it, don't expect to have that happen in 2 or 3 years, because it just is not. It's too complicated for that.
yeah, patience.
Yeah.
Have the patience to see it through. I
Yeah.
think about a conversation I had yesterday with somebody about trust the process, the law of process.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
that's really good. Well,
It
Stephen, thank
unfolds.
you so much. I really appreciate
Yeah,
it.
it's
You
my pleasure.
sharing. Yeah, you're just such a wealth of knowledge, and I know you've got all your books and resources, and we'll make sure all of that, of course, is available in the show notes. Your website is stephenlblue.com, and we'll make
Yep.
sure that's also there.
Good.
Um, what would you say, like, where somebody, if they wanted to reach out to you, is that the best place to reach out to you? And who would be like, because obviously you have your own company and,
Mhm.
and your focus there.
Yeah.
You consult for other companies as
Yeah, I
well.
do.
You're kind of alluding to that.
I do. Nicole, I'm not crazy about consulting, because usually when they call for a consultant, they're in deep trouble and they don't like the answer that you give them. And so you're sort of in a struggle and in a battle with them to try to convince them. And the last time I did one of these, the company was a mess. And so I told the CEO, I said, here, you're going to have to pay me up front before I even step into your building. And he said, why? I said, because within 2 weeks of me talking to your troops and asking questions, they're going to tell you let some crazy wild man in here and you got to get rid of him. And I guarantee you, and it's not, and I've seen that before, so I know that happens. The organization pushes back. So I generally don't like consulting. I prefer like keynote speeches. I do a fair amount of those, and that's kind of what I like best.
Got it.
But I'll do for the right thing that the CEO wants me to do under the right conditions. Yeah, I would do that.
Got it. All right. So you got your books, you've got your articles that you've written, you've got your own example of your success in your business, and then keynotes and potential consulting for the right.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing in that is they got to be ready for it. They got to be
Yeah.
ready if they're going to
Yeah.
take the time to work with you. So,
Where
Stephen,
do they reach for a consultant? Usually when their board tells them to.
right. Check the box. Yeah, we'll bring
Right.
in the consultant. I think we were talking about this actually. It was you and I that I was saying, yeah. So if there's so many leadership consultants out there, why are there so many messed up companies? And I think, it's a valid question.
It is.
There's tons of people out there. I mean, I do leadership coaching and
Uh-huh.
working with leaders, and you can blame the consultants, but there's also that fixed mindset that
Yeah.
isn't open to being
What they
coachable.
want when they
Or
call in a consultant is they want the consultant to tell the board he's doing everything right. Don't worry.
yeah, yeah,
And then that just doesn't work. I mean, if everything was like to your point, if everything is going right, you wouldn't need a consultant.
yeah.
But
I remember
I
this.
love your phrase about if there's so many consultants out there, why are there so many screwed up businesses?
Yeah, it's funny because I remember this one leader who, if you ask a leader how they're doing as a leader, they're going to say, "I'm doing great
Great.
for the most part."
Yeah.
But then, like you said, you go talk to the key leaders and you find out the truth about that.
Yeah.
And whenever I hear a leader that says, "You need to fix my people," I go, "Really? Let's have a conversation about that," because I have an inkling that the problem is right here.
You
Yeah.
bet.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
So, well, this has been great, Stephen. Thank you so much for your time. I
My
appreciate it.
pleasure.
And I always say, leaders of transformation take action. So I encourage our listeners and our viewers to take action on something that you learned here. Maybe you need to re-listen to this because there was a lot that was shared in this conversation by Stephen, and look at how this applies to you. Talk about innovation, talk about investing in your people. There's so much here. So I encourage you to take action on something that you learned, because transformation requires action. It requires thought, consideration, awareness, and then you got to do something with that. So we
Yeah.
encourage you to do that. We'd love to hear your stories. You can go on leadersoftranformation.com. Of course, you can find us on social as well. And we'd love to hear how this has impacted you. And if you like this episode, please share it with a friend. Maybe you know someone who has a company, they're struggling. Maybe they went through the pandemic and they just don't know how to adapt. They're waiting to go back to the old normal, which of course is not going to happen. So they've got
Mhm.
to innovate and move forward. And so, share it with them and give them the gifts of some insight and opportunity for them to be able to move into the future with confidence. So we encourage you to do that. We appreciate you. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to seeing you next week on another episode of the Leaders of Transformation.